In the heat of battle, when bullets fly and chaos reigns, soldiers learn to expect the unexpected. But nothing could have prepared the men of the 82nd Airborne Division for what happened on that scorching afternoon in Afghanistan. One moment, their unit's medic was there, treating wounded soldiers under heavy enemy fire. The next moment, she was gone, vanished without a trace, as if the earth had swallowed her whole. What happened next defied all logic and military protocol. The Taliban fighters, who had been relentlessly attacking their position for hours, suddenly stopped shooting. The battlefield fell into an eerie silence that chilled every soldier to the bone. In war, silence is often more terrifying than the loudest explosion. This is the true story of Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, a combat medic whose disappearance triggered a chain of events that would challenge everything these hardened soldiers thought they knew about war, humanity, and the thin line between enemy and ally. It's a story that the military tried to classify, that witnesses struggled to explain, and that would haunt everyone involved for years to come. Sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin with the most ordinary people doing their jobs. But when the impossible happens, ordinary people become legends. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez had always been different from other soldiers. While her fellow paratroopers spent their downtime playing cards or writing letters home, Maria could usually be found studying medical journals or practicing emergency procedures on anyone willing to volunteer as a patient. At 28 years old, she had already served 3 tours in Afghanistan and had earned the respect of every soldier who had ever worked alongside her. Maria came from a large family in El Paso, Texas, where her grandmother had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was just 12. Her grandmother, Elena Rodriguez, was a curandera, a traditional healer who used herbs and old remedies to treat people in their neighborhood. Elena had taught Maria that healing was not just about medicine, but about understanding people and showing compassion even in the darkest moments. When Maria enlisted in the army at 18, her grandmother had been worried but proud. "Mija," Elena had said, placing her weathered hands on Maria's shoulders, "you carry the gift of healing. Use it wisely, and it will protect you when nothing else can." Maria had laughed at the time, thinking her grandmother was being overly dramatic. But as she gained experience as a combat medic, she began to understand what Elena meant. Maria had a reputation for going beyond the call of duty. During her second deployment, she had crawled through enemy fire to reach a wounded Afghan interpreter who had been helping American forces. Despite orders to fall back, Maria had refused to leave the man behind. She spent 4 hours in a bombed-out building, keeping the interpreter alive while Taliban fighters surrounded their position. When backup finally arrived, they found Maria had not only saved the interpreter's life, but had also treated 2 local children who had been caught in the crossfire. The incident had earned Maria a Bronze Star, but more importantly, it had earned her something even rarer in a war zone: the respect of local civilians. Word spread through the villages about the American woman medic who would risk her life to help anyone who was hurt, regardless of which side they were on. Afghan mothers would point her out to their children, calling her the angel doctor in Pashto. On the morning of June 15, 2011, Maria's unit received orders to secure a strategic valley in Helmand province. Intelligence reports indicated that Taliban forces were using the area to move weapons and supplies between Pakistan and Afghanistan. The mission was supposed to be routine: establish a perimeter, search for weapons caches, and hold a position until reinforcements arrived. Captain James Mitchell, the unit commander, briefed his soldiers on the operation. "This should be a quick in and out," he told them. "Intelligence says the area has been quiet for weeks. We go in, do our job, and come home." But Maria felt uneasy about the mission from the start. She had learned to trust her instincts, and something about this assignment felt wrong. The unit consisted of 32 soldiers from the 82nd Airborne Division, including Maria and 3 other medics. They were accompanied by Staff Sergeant Ahmed Hassan, an Afghan interpreter who had been working with American forces for over 2 years. Ahmed was one of the best interpreters in the region, fluent in English, Pashto, and Dari. He had a wife and 2 young daughters in Kabul and sent most of his salary home to support them. As their convoy of armored vehicles approached the valley, Maria checked her medical supplies one more time. She carried enough equipment to treat everything from minor cuts to life-threatening injuries. Her medical bag contained morphine, antibiotics, bandages for fluids, and emergency surgical tools. She also carried something less standard, a small pouch of medicinal herbs that her grandmother had sent from Texas. Maria had never used them in combat, but she kept them as a reminder of home and the healing traditions Elena had taught her. The valley was beautiful in a harsh, desolate way. Surrounded by rocky hills and scattered with ancient ruins, it looked like something from another century. The only signs of modern life were the dirt roads carved by military vehicles and the occasional piece of debris left behind by previous patrols. As their convoy entered the valley, Maria noticed how quiet everything was. There were no birds singing, no sounds of daily life from nearby villages. The soldiers established their base camp near an old stone building that might have once been a mosque or school. Captain Mitchell deployed his men in defensive positions around the perimeter while Maria and the other medics set up a field hospital inside the building. They had been in position for less than an hour when the first shots rang out. The attack came from 3 directions at once, suggesting a well-coordinated ambush. Taliban fighters had positioned themselves in the hills surrounding the valley, giving them clear fields of fire down onto the American position. Within minutes, the peaceful valley had transformed into a war zone. Private Danny Cooper, a 19-year-old soldier from Ohio, was hit by sniper fire while manning a machine gun position. The bullet struck him in the shoulder, sending him tumbling behind a low stone wall. "Medic!" he screamed, blood seeping through his uniform. Maria grabbed her medical bag and sprinted across 30 yards of open ground to reach Cooper. Bullets whizzed past her head, kicking up dust and rock fragments as she ran. She slid into position behind the wall and immediately began assessing Cooper's wound. The bullet had shattered his collarbone and damaged an artery. Without immediate treatment, he would bleed to death within minutes. Working quickly, Maria applied pressure to the wound while preparing in 4-line. "You're going to be fine, Cooper," she told him, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. "Just a flesh wound. You'll have a great scar to show the girls back home." Her steady confidence helped keep Cooper from panicking as she worked to save his life. While treating Cooper, Maria heard Captain Mitchell shouting orders over the radio. "We've got wounded. Multiple casualties. Request immediate medical evacuation." But the Taliban fire was too intense for helicopters to land safely. The unit was pinned down with no way out. Sergeant First Class Mike Torres, a veteran with 4 deployments under his belt, was hit next. A rocket-propelled grenade exploded near his position, sending shrapnel into his legs and back. Maria had just finished stabilizing Cooper when she heard Torres calling for help. "Rodriguez, get over here." Torres was trying to crawl to safety, leaving a trail of blood behind him. Maria looked at Cooper, who was now stable but still needed monitoring, then at Torres, who was in immediate danger. She made the split-second decision that combat medics face constantly: who to save first when multiple lives hang in the balance. "Cooper, keep pressure on that bandage," she shouted, then grabbed her bag and ran toward Torres. An enemy sniper tracked her movement, bullets striking the ground inches from her feet. Maria dove and rolled, using every piece of cover she could find to reach the wounded sergeant. Torres was in bad shape. Shrapnel had severed an artery in his thigh, and he was losing blood fast. Maria applied a tourniquet to stop the bleeding, then began cleaning and bandaging his wounds. As she worked, Torres grabbed her arm with surprising strength. "Rodriguez," he said, his voice weak but urgent. "There's something wrong about this attack. These guys know exactly where we are, exactly how many of us there are. They knew we were coming." Before Maria could ask what he meant, another explosion rocked their position, and Torres lost consciousness. Over the next 3 hours, the firefight intensified. Maria moved constantly between wounded soldiers, treating injuries and coordinating medical evacuations that couldn't happen because of the ongoing attack. She had treated 7 wounded soldiers when she noticed something strange. Despite the ferocity of the Taliban attack, their aim seemed deliberately poor. Many shots that should have been kill shots instead inflicted wounds that were serious, but not fatal. Ahmed, the interpreter, had taken cover near Maria's makeshift aid station. He had been helping her communicate with local civilians who had been caught in the fighting, an elderly man and 2 young children who had been gathering firewood when the battle began. Maria noticed that Ahmed kept looking toward the hills where the enemy fire was coming from, as if he was searching for something specific. Ahmed, Maria called to him during a brief lull in the shooting. "What's going on? Do you recognize these fighters?" Ahmed's face was pale with fear, but not the kind of fear Maria had seen in combat before. This was different, more like the terror of someone who had discovered a terrible secret. "Dr. Rodriguez," he said, using the formal title the Afghan civilians had given her. I think they are not here for your soldiers." Before Maria could ask what he meant, a new sound cut through the battlefield, the distinctive whistle of incoming mortar rounds. Maria threw herself over the wounded soldier she had been treating, shielding him with her body as explosions erupted around their position. When the barrage stopped, she looked up to see Ahmed running toward the enemy lines, waving a white cloth over his head and shouting in Pashto. Maria watched in shock as Ahmed reached the base of the hill where the Taliban fighters were positioned. She could see him talking animatedly with several armed men, pointing back toward the American position and then toward something in the distance that she couldn't see. After several minutes of conversation, Ahmed began walking back toward the American lines. But he never made it. A single gunshot rang out from somewhere in the hills. Not from the Taliban position where Ahmed had been talking, but from a different location entirely. Ahmed collapsed in the middle of the valley, halfway between the two sides. Maria didn't hesitate. Despite Captain Mitchell's shouted orders to stay in position, she grabbed her medical bag and ran into the open ground where Ahmed lay motionless. As she reached him, she could see that he had been shot in the chest. Blood was pooling beneath him, but he was still conscious. "Ahmed, don't try to talk," Maria said as she began treating his wound. But Ahmed grabbed her hand with desperate strength. "Doctor," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the renewed gunfire. They are not Taliban. Some of them, yes, but others are." His voice trailed off as his eyes rolled back. Maria worked frantically to save Ahmed's life, but the bullet had punctured his lung and damaged his heart. As she tried to stop the bleeding, she became aware that the gunfire around them had changed. Instead of the chaotic, overlapping sounds of multiple weapons, now there was just a single sniper shooting from somewhere in the hills. And that sniper was shooting at her. Bullets struck the ground around Maria as she worked over Ahmed's body. She could hear Captain Mitchell and the other soldiers returning fire, trying to suppress the sniper and give her cover. But the sniper was too well positioned and too skilled. Maria realized with growing alarm that she was pinned down in the middle of the valley with a dying man and no way to reach safety. That's when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Ahmed's eyes had opened again, and he was staring past her toward the hills. Following his gaze, Maria saw movement among the rocks. Not the Taliban fighters who had been shooting at them all afternoon, but different men in different uniforms. These men were moving systematically through the Taliban positions, and wherever they went, the shooting stopped. Ahmed managed to speak one more time, his voice so quiet that Maria had to lean down to hear him. "Dr. Rodriguez," he said, "they came for me. Not soldiers. For me. Because I know about." Ahmed's eyes closed, and Maria felt his pulse fade beneath her fingers. Staff Sergeant Ahmed Hassan, interpreter and father of 2, was dead. But his final words had revealed something that changed everything Maria thought she knew about their situation. As Maria knelt beside Ahmed's body in the middle of the valley, she became aware of an eerie silence settling over the battlefield. The gunfire had stopped completely. Looking toward the American positions, she could see her fellow soldiers crouched behind their cover, weapons ready, but with no targets to shoot at. Looking toward the hills where the Taliban fighters had been positioned, she saw only empty rocks and shadows. Maria stood up slowly, her medical bag still in her hand, Ahmed's blood still on her uniform. She turned in a complete circle, scanning the entire valley. The 31 other members of her unit were all accounted for, all staring at her from their positions around the perimeter. But the enemy fighters who had been shooting at them for hours had simply vanished. In the sudden quiet, Maria could hear the wind blowing through the ancient ruins and the distant sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the east. Medical evacuation was finally coming. But as she stood alone in the middle of the valley with Ahmed's body at her feet, Maria realized that this was just the beginning of something much larger and more dangerous than a routine Taliban ambush. She had no idea that within the next few hours, she would discover the truth about Ahmed's final words, uncover a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of military command, and make a decision that would change the course of her life forever. All she knew was that Ahmed had died, trying to tell her something important, and that the sudden disappearance of their attackers was not the end of their troubles. It was the beginning of something far worse. The medical evacuation helicopters arrived 20 minutes after the shooting stopped, their rotors churning up clouds of dust as they landed in the valley. Maria helped load the wounded soldiers onto stretchers, her hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the questions racing through her mind. 7 soldiers needed immediate medical attention, including Private Cooper and Sergeant Torres, both of whom would survive thanks to Maria's quick treatment under fire. As the helicopters lifted off with the casualties, Captain Mitchell approached Maria with a grim expression. "Rodriguez, I need to talk to you about what happened with the interpreter." Mitchell was a career officer with 15 years of experience, but Maria could see that the afternoon's events had shaken him badly. "Ahmed was trying to tell me something before he died," Maria said. "He said the attackers weren't all Taliban, and that they came for him specifically. He knew something, Captain, something important enough to get him killed." Mitchell looked around to make sure no one else was listening, then moved closer to Maria. "That's what worries me. Ahmed had been acting strange for the past week, asking questions about troop movements and supply schedules. Command was already suspicious about him." Maria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. "You think Ahmed was working for the Taliban?" "I don't know what to think anymore," Mitchell admitted. "But I do know that this mission was supposed to be classified. The Taliban were waiting for us, Rodriguez. They knew exactly when and where we'd be coming." As if to emphasize Mitchell's point, Staff Sergeant Jenkins approached them carrying Ahmed's personal effects. "Captain, you need to see this," Jenkins said, holding out Ahmed's cell phone. "I found it near his body. The last number he called was to someone in Kabul, but when I tried to call it back, the line was disconnected." Mitchell took the phone and scrolled through the call history. "These calls, some of them, are to numbers I recognize. Military contacts." He looked at Maria with growing concern. "Rodriguez, I'm starting to think we walked into something a lot bigger than a routine Taliban ambush." The unit spent that night in defensive positions around the valley, waiting for orders and trying to make sense of what had happened. Maria couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Ahmed's final words and the strange way the enemy fighters had disappeared. Around 3 in the morning, she decided to examine Ahmed's body more carefully. Using a flashlight, Maria studied the bullet wound that had killed Ahmed. Based on the angle of entry and the trajectory, the shot had come from a position different from where the Taliban fighters had been shooting from. This meant that someone else, someone hidden from both the Americans and the Taliban, had killed Ahmed. Maria was still examining the body when she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up to see Private Lisa Chun, a young soldier who had been assigned as Maria's assistant medic. Chun was holding something in her hand, a small piece of paper. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Chun whispered, "I found this in Ahmed's pocket when we were preparing his body for transport." I thought you should see it before anyone else does. The paper was folded several times and written in Ahmed's handwriting. It contained what appeared to be a list of names, dates, and locations. Maria recognized some of the names as American military personnel, including several high-ranking officers. The dates corresponded to recent military operations in Afghanistan, and the locations were all strategic sites that had been attacked by Taliban forces. At the bottom of the list, Ahmed had written a message in English. They're selling information to both sides. Meeting tomorrow at Old Shrine. Proof hidden in medical supplies. Trust only the angel doctor. Maria's hands trembled as she read the note. Ahmed had discovered a conspiracy involving American military personnel who were selling intelligence to the Taliban. But the note suggested something even more disturbing. These same people were also selling information to American forces about Taliban movements. They were playing both sides against each other and profiting from the ongoing conflict. Chun, we need to get this to Captain Mitchell immediately, Maria said. But Chun shook her head. Sergeant, look at the names on that list. Captain Mitchell's name is on there. Maria looked again at the paper, and her heart sank. Chun was right. Captain Mitchell's name appeared twice on Ahmed's list, along with dates that corresponded to missions where Taliban forces had seemed unusually well prepared for American attacks. What do we do? Chun asked. Who can we trust if our own commanding officer is involved? Before Maria could answer, they heard voices approaching their position. Captain Mitchell was walking toward them with two other soldiers Maria didn't recognize. These men were wearing different uniforms, not the standard army gear worn by Maria's unit, but the specialized equipment used by military intelligence operatives. Rodriguez, Mitchell called out. I need to speak with both of you. Maria quickly folded Ahmed's note and slipped it into her medical bag. Yes, sir. These gentlemen are from military intelligence, Mitchell said, indicating the two strangers. They need to debrief you about your conversation with the interpreter before he died. The first intelligence officer, who introduced himself only as Agent Carter, was a tall, thin man with cold eyes and a precise way of speaking. Sergeant Rodriguez, we understand you were the last person to speak with Ahmed Hassan before his death. Can you tell us exactly what he said? Maria looked at Chun, then back at Agent Carter. Something about the man's demeanor put her on edge. Ahmed was badly wounded. He wasn't making much sense. He mentioned something about the attackers, but I couldn't understand most of what he was saying. Agent Carter's partner, Agent Morrison, stepped forward. Morrison was shorter and stockier than Carter, with the build of someone who had spent years in combat operations. Sergeant, it's very important that you remember every detail. Ahmed Hassan was under investigation for suspected collaboration with enemy forces. Anything he told you could be crucial to our ongoing operation. Investigation? Maria asked. What kind of investigation? That's classified, Carter replied. But I can tell you that Ahmed had been selling information to Taliban commanders for the past 6 months. We believe he arranged today's ambush to eliminate American personnel who were getting close to exposing his network. Maria felt the weight of Ahmed's note in her medical bag. If these agents were telling the truth, then Ahmed was a traitor who had orchestrated an attack on her unit. But something about their story didn't match what she had witnessed. Ahmed had risked his life trying to communicate with the Taliban fighters, and he had been shot by someone other than the main group of attackers. If Ahmed was working for the Taliban, Maria said carefully, why did they shoot him? Carter and Morrison exchanged glances. We believe there was a disagreement among the conspirators, Morrison said. Ahmed may have been trying to change sides again, or he might have been demanding more money. These criminal networks are inherently unstable. Captain Mitchell, who had been listening to the conversation, stepped forward. Regardless of Ahmed's motives, we have a more immediate problem. Command wants us to conduct a sweep of the surrounding area tomorrow morning. Intelligence indicates there may be weapons caches hidden in the local villages. Maria knew that such operations were often dangerous for both soldiers and civilians. Villages suspected of harboring weapons were typically surrounded and searched house by house, a process that frequently resulted in casualties among local residents. Given what she now suspected about the conspiracy Ahmed had uncovered, She worried that tomorrow's operation might be another setup. "Captain," Maria said, "given what happened today, shouldn't we wait for additional support before conducting village operations?" "Orders are orders, Sergeant," Mitchell replied. "We move out at 0600 hours." After the intelligence agents left, Maria and Chen returned to their defensive position. Maria waited until she was sure they weren't being watched, then showed Chen Ahmed's note again. "Look at this," Maria whispered, pointing to a specific line on the paper. Ahmed wrote, "Proof hidden in medical supplies." What if he hid evidence of the conspiracy in our own medical equipment? Chen's eyes widened. "You mean it could be right here with us?" Maria began searching through her medical supplies, looking for anything that seemed out of place. In the bottom of her main medical bag, she found a small package wrapped in plastic that she didn't recognize. Inside the package was a USB drive and another note from Ahmed. The note explained that Ahmed had been working undercover for American military investigators, trying to expose a network of officers who were selling intelligence to the highest bidder. The USB drive contained recordings of conversations between these officers and both Taliban and Pakistani intelligence operatives. Ahmed had hidden the evidence in Maria's medical supplies because he knew she could be trusted. "The angel doctor," Chun whispered, reading the note. "That's what the local people called you. Ahmed knew you wouldn't be part of any conspiracy." Maria plugged the USB drive into Chen's laptop computer, and they watched in horror as the evidence of betrayal unfolded before them. The recordings showed American officers providing detailed information about troop movements, supply routes, and planned operations to enemy commanders. But more shocking was the revelation that some of these same officers were also selling false information to American forces, sending them into unnecessary battles for the sake of maintaining their cover. The conspiracy involved at least a dozen high-ranking military personnel across multiple branches of service. They had been operating for over 2 years, prolonging the conflict in Afghanistan while profiting from arms sales, intelligence trading, and reconstruction contracts. Hundreds of American soldiers had died or been wounded in operations that were designed more to maintain the conspiracy's profits than to achieve military objectives. On the recordings, Maria heard Captain Mitchell's voice clearly discussing the details of their current mission with unknown contacts. The conversation revealed that today's ambush had been arranged not to kill American soldiers, but to eliminate Ahmed before he could expose the conspiracy. The Taliban fighters had been told to stage a realistic battle while allowing a sniper to kill the interpreter. "We have to get this information to someone we can trust," Maria said. "But how do we know who's involved and who isn't?" Chen pointed to something else Ahmed had written on his note. "Look here. He mentions Colonel Sarah Williams at Bagram Airfield. He says she's leading the investigation and can be trusted." Colonel Williams was the base commander at Bagram, one of the largest American military installations in Afghanistan. Ahmed's note indicated that she had been secretly investigating the intelligence leak for months and was close to making arrests. But the conspiracy had become aware of her investigation and was planning to eliminate her as well. Tomorrow's village sweep operation, Maria realized with growing alarm. What if it's not about finding weapons? What if it's another setup? Chen pulled up a map on her computer and studied the planned route for tomorrow's mission. "Look at this, Sergeant. The villages we're supposed to search are all in areas where Colonel Williams has been conducting her own investigation. If we go in there tomorrow morning, we could be walking into another ambush." Maria made a decision that would change everything. "Chen, we're not going on that mission tomorrow. We're going to disappear." "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're going to take this evidence and get to Colonel Williams ourselves." Ahmed risked his life to expose this conspiracy, and those recordings prove that American soldiers are dying because of the greed of their own officers. "We can't let that continue." "But that would be desertion," Chen protested. "We could face court-martial, prison time, or worse." Maria looked at the USB drive containing Ahmed's evidence, then at the list of names that included some of the highest-ranking officers in the region. "Chun, if we go on tomorrow's mission, there's a good chance we'll be killed to keep us from talking about what Ahmed told us. If we stay and report to Captain Mitchell, This evidence will disappear, and the conspiracy will continue. The only way to save lives, including our own, is to get this information to Colonel Williams. Chin was quiet for several minutes, considering the implications of what Maria was proposing. Finally, she nodded. Okay, how do we do it? We leave tonight, before the mission begins. I'll create a medical emergency that requires immediate evacuation to Bagram. You'll come with me as my assistant. Once we're there, we find Colonel Williams and turn over Ahmed's evidence. What kind of medical emergency? Maria thought for a moment, then smiled grimly. I'll have a severe allergic reaction to something I ate. Life-threatening anaphylactic shock. It will require immediate treatment at a major medical facility. It was a risky plan that depended on many factors beyond their control. But as Maria looked around at her sleeping fellow soldiers, she realized that doing nothing was even more dangerous. Tomorrow's mission would likely result in more unnecessary casualties, and the conspiracy Ahmed had died to expose would continue claiming American lives. At 4 o'clock in the morning, Maria began implementing her plan. She used medications from her medical supplies to induce symptoms that resembled a severe allergic reaction, elevated heart rate, difficulty breathing, and skin inflammation. Chen performed her role perfectly, discovering Maria's condition and immediately calling for emergency medical evacuation. Captain Mitchell was awakened and informed of the medical emergency. How serious is it? He asked Chen. Very serious, sir, Chen replied, following the script she and Maria had rehearsed. Sergeant Rodriguez needs immediate treatment at a major medical facility, or she could die. I need to accompany her to monitor her condition during transport. Mitchell looked suspicious. This is very convenient timing, don't you think? Right before we're supposed to begin a major operation. Sir, allergic reactions don't follow military schedules, Chen said. Sergeant Rodriguez ate something yesterday that didn't agree with her. These delayed reactions can be fatal if not treated properly. Within an hour, a medical evacuation helicopter was en route to their position. As Maria was loaded onto a stretcher, she caught Captain Mitchell's eye. For a moment, she thought she saw something in his expression that suggested he knew exactly what she was doing. But he said nothing as the helicopter lifted off, carrying Maria and Chun away from the valley. As they flew through the pre-dawn darkness toward Bagram airfield, Maria clutched Ahmed's USB drive in her hand. She thought about the interpreter's final words and his courage in trying to expose the conspiracy that had cost so many lives. She also thought about her grandmother's words from years ago. You carry the gift of healing. Use it wisely, and it will protect you when nothing else can. Maria realized that healing sometimes meant more than treating individual wounds. Sometimes it meant exposing the disease that was poisoning an entire system. Ahmed Hassan had given his life to reveal the truth about corruption within the American military in Afghanistan. Now, it was up to Maria to make sure his sacrifice wasn't in vain. But as their helicopter approached Bagram airfield, Maria had no idea that Captain Mitchell was already making phone calls that would ensure her arrival was expected. The conspiracy Ahmed had died to expose had tentacles reaching throughout the military command structure, and Maria was about to discover that finding someone to trust would be much more difficult than she had imagined. The real test of her courage and Ahmed's evidence was just beginning. The medical evacuation helicopter touched down at Bagram airfield just as the sun was rising over the Afghan mountains. Maria maintained her performance as a patient suffering from severe allergic reaction, while medics transferred her to the base hospital. Private Chun stayed close by, playing her role as the concerned assistant who had discovered the emergency. Once they were alone in the hospital room, Maria quickly recovered from her fake symptoms. We need to find Colonel Williams immediately, she told Chun. The longer we wait, the more likely it becomes that Captain Mitchell will realize what we're really doing here. But finding Colonel Williams proved more difficult than expected. When Chun inquired at the base command center about the colonel's whereabouts, she was told that Williams was conducting classified meetings and couldn't be disturbed. The duty officer, Major Thompson, seemed suspicious about their urgent request to speak with the base commander. "What's this regarding?" Major Thompson asked Chen. "Medical personnel don't usually request meetings with the base commander without going through proper channels." Chen had prepared for this question. "Sir, it's regarding the death of an interpreter yesterday. Sergeant Rodriguez was the medic who treated him, and she has information that Colonel Williams specifically requested in connection with an ongoing investigation." Major Thompson's expression changed immediately. "What kind of information?" "I'm not authorized to discuss the details," Chen replied. "But Colonel Williams told her unit to report directly to her if anything happened to Ahmed Hassan." That was a lie, but Chen delivered it with such conviction that Major Thompson believed her. "Wait here," he said. "I'll contact the colonel's aide and see if she can spare a few minutes." While they waited, Maria and Chen noticed something troubling. Several military police officers had taken positions around the hospital, ostensibly for routine security, but actually forming a perimeter that would prevent anyone from leaving the building without being noticed. Maria began to suspect that Captain Mitchell's phone calls from the valley had been effective. "Chun," Maria whispered, "I think we're walking into a trap. Look at how those MPs are positioned. They're not protecting the hospital, they're containing it." Before Chun could respond, Major Thompson returned with two other officers. One was Colonel Sarah Williams, a distinguished-looking woman in her 40s with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. The other was a man Maria didn't recognize, wearing civilian clothes, but carrying himself like military personnel. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Colonel Williams said, approaching Maria's bed. "Major Thompson tells me you have information about Ahmed Hassan. I understand you were present when he died yesterday." Maria studied Colonel Williams carefully, trying to determine if this was the person Ahmed had trusted or another part of the conspiracy. "Yes, ma'am. Ahmed was killed while trying to communicate with Taliban fighters. But before he died, he gave me something." Maria reached in her medical bag and pulled out Ahmed's USB drive. "Ahmed said you were investigating intelligence leaks, and that this evidence would prove who was responsible." Colonel Williams took the drive, but instead of examining it immediately, she handed it to the civilian-dressed man beside her. "This is Agent Patterson from the Defense Intelligence Agency," she explained. "He's been working with me on the investigation Ahmed was supporting." Agent Patterson plugged the USB drive into a laptop computer and began reviewing its contents. As he watched the recordings of American officers selling intelligence to enemy contacts, his expression grew increasingly grim. "Colonel, this is exactly what we needed. These recordings confirm everything Ahmed reported to us over the past months." "Ahmed was working for you?" Maria asked. "Ahmed Hassan was one of the bravest men I've ever had the privilege to work with," Colonel Williams replied. "For 8 months, he risked his life gathering evidence of a conspiracy that was costing American lives and prolonging this war for profit. Yesterday's attack was supposed to eliminate him before he could testify before a military tribunal." Agent Patterson looked up from the laptop. "According to these recordings, the conspiracy involves 12 officers across multiple command levels. They've been selling information to Taliban commanders while also feeding false intelligence to American forces to create opportunities for weapons sales and reconstruction contracts." Maria felt a mixture of relief and anger. Relief that she had found the right people to trust with Ahmed's evidence, and anger at the scope of the betrayal Ahmed had uncovered. "Colonel, Captain Mitchell was involved. His name is on Ahmed's list, and I heard his voice on some of those recordings." "We know," Colonel Williams said. "Captain Mitchell has been under surveillance for months. We allowed yesterday's mission to proceed because we hoped Ahmed would be able to gather final evidence of the conspiracy's operations. We didn't anticipate that they would try to kill him." "But why didn't you warn our unit?" Chen asked. 7 soldiers were wounded yesterday. Some of them nearly died." Agent Patterson closed the laptop and looked at both women seriously. "Because we didn't know how deep the conspiracy went within your unit. For all we knew, half your soldiers could have been compromised. We couldn't risk exposing our investigation until we had enough evidence to make arrests," Colonel Williams added, Ahmed's death was a tragedy, but his sacrifice has given us everything we need to shut down this network. Within the next 24 hours, all 12 conspirators will be arrested simultaneously across multiple bases. Maria felt some satisfaction knowing that Ahmed's courage would finally bring justice to those who had betrayed their fellow soldiers. But something still bothered her about the entire situation. Colonel, if you already had most of the evidence you needed, why was Ahmed's final information so critical? Because we needed proof of the Pakistani connection, Agent Patterson explained. The conspiracy wasn't just selling information to Taliban fighters. They were also working with Pakistani intelligence operatives who were coordinating attacks on American supply lines. Ahmed's recordings provide evidence of meetings between American officers and Pakistani agents that took place in supposedly secure facilities. The scope of the betrayal was even worse than Maria had imagined. American military personnel had not only been selling information to the Taliban, but had also been working with Pakistani intelligence to undermine American operations throughout the region. The conspiracy had effectively been running a double-agent network that profited from prolonging the conflict while weakening American strategic position in Afghanistan. "There's one more thing," Colonel Williams said, her expression becoming even more serious. "The conspiracy knows that Ahmed passed information to you before he died. Captain Mitchell reported that you and Private Chun had suspicious behavior during the mission and recommended that you both be investigated for possible collaboration with enemy forces." Maria felt her blood run cold. "You mean they're going to accuse us of being traitors?" "They're going to try," Agent Patterson said. But Ahmed's recordings include conversations where the conspirators discuss their plan to eliminate any witnesses to his final statements. "Your medical evacuation yesterday probably saved your lives." Colonel Williams handed Maria an official document. "Effective immediately, you and Private Chun are being transferred to my direct command for protective custody. You'll remain here at Bagram while we complete the arrests and prepare for the military tribunals." Over the next week, Maria and Chun watched as the conspiracy Ahmed had died to expose was systematically dismantled. Captain Mitchell was arrested along with 11 other officers ranging from lieutenants to full colonels. The evidence Ahmed had gathered led to additional investigations that uncovered an even larger network of corruption involving defense contractors and foreign intelligence services. The military tribunals that followed were conducted in secret due to the sensitive nature of the intelligence involved. Captain Mitchell and 3 other officers received sentences of life imprisonment for treason. The remaining conspirators received varying sentences ranging from 10 to 30 years in military prison. Several defense contractors were also prosecuted in civilian courts for their roles in the conspiracy. But the true extent of Ahmed Hassan's courage only became clear when Agent Patterson shared the full story of his undercover work. Ahmed had been approached by Pakistani intelligence agents 18 months earlier and asked to spy on American operations. Instead of accepting their offer, Ahmed had immediately contacted American military investigators and volunteered to become a double agent. For over a year, Ahmed had fed false information to Pakistani handlers while secretly recording their instructions and gathering evidence of their network within American military ranks. He had known that his work was extremely dangerous, but he had persisted because he believed in the American mission in Afghanistan and wanted to protect the soldiers he worked alongside. Ahmed could have taken the money and become a real traitor, Agent Patterson explained to Maria. Pakistani intelligence was offering him enough money to support his family for the rest of their lives. Instead, he chose to risk everything to expose the people who were betraying American soldiers. The night before Maria and Chin were scheduled to return to their unit, Colonel Williams invited them to a private memorial service for Ahmed Hassan. The service was attended by only a handful of people who had known about Ahmed's true mission: military investigators, intelligence officers, and a few senior commanders who had supported the operation. During the service, Maria learned more about Ahmed's personal story. His wife, Fatima, had been a teacher in Kabul before the Taliban banned women from working. His 2 daughters, ages 6 and 8, attended a secret school that Fatima operated from their home. Ahmed had been saving money to bring his family to America, where his daughters could receive a proper education and his wife could return to teaching. Ahmed Hassan represents the best of what America and Afghanistan could accomplish together, Colonel Williams said during her eulogy. He risked everything for the principles of justice and truth, even when his own commanders had betrayed those principles. After the service, Agent Patterson approached Maria with an unexpected request. Sergeant Rodriguez, the Defense Intelligence Agency, would like to offer you a position as a military investigator. Your actions over the past week demonstrate exactly the kind of courage and integrity we need for sensitive operations. Maria was honored by the offer, but she knew immediately what her answer would be. Thank you, sir, but I'm a medic. My job is to heal people, not to investigate them. I want to go back to my unit and continue doing what I do best. Even after everything you've seen? Agent Patterson asked, even knowing how much corruption exists within the military system. Especially because of what I've seen, Maria replied. Ahmed Hassan taught me that the best way to fight corruption is to do your job with integrity, no matter what other people around you are doing. I can't save the entire military system, but I can save the soldiers who come to me for medical treatment. Colonel Williams smiled at Maria's response. Ahmed will be proud of you, Sergeant. He believed that ordinary people doing extraordinary things could change the world, one life at a time. 3 months later, Maria was back in the field with a new unit, serving her 4th deployment in Afghanistan. The conspiracy Ahmed had exposed was fully dismantled, and new oversight procedures had been implemented to prevent similar networks from developing. The war in Afghanistan continued, but without the deliberate sabotage that had caused so many unnecessary casualties. Maria kept Ahmed's memory alive by treating every wounded soldier with the same dedication he had shown to protecting his American colleagues. She also began writing letters to Ahmed's family, using part of her salary to help support his daughter's education. Through an Afghan-American cultural organization, she was able to arrange for Fatima and the girls to immigrate to the United States, where they settled in Maria's hometown of El Paso, Texas. When Maria returned to Texas on leave, she introduced Ahmed's family to her grandmother Elena. The two women, one a traditional Mexican healer, the other an Afghan teacher, formed an immediate bond despite their different languages and cultures. Elena began teaching Fatima about medicinal herbs, while Fatima helped Elena understand Afghan traditions of hospitality and family honor. Mija, Elena told Maria one evening as they sat on the porch watching Ahmed's daughters play in the yard. Your friend Ahmed understood what I tried to teach you years ago. Healing is not just about medicine. It's about understanding that all people are connected and that helping one person helps everyone. Maria realized that Ahmed's sacrifice had accomplished something far beyond exposing a military conspiracy. His courage had demonstrated that people of different backgrounds and cultures could work together for justice, even in the middle of a war zone. His willingness to risk everything for the truth had saved countless lives and restored integrity to operations throughout the region. On her final deployment to Afghanistan, Maria served as chief medic for a unit conducting humanitarian operations in remote villages. Among her equipment was the same medical bag that had carried Ahmed's evidence, but now it also contained medicinal herbs that Elena and Fatima had prepared together, a blend of Mexican and Afghan traditional remedies that had proven effective for treating various ailments. During one medical mission, Maria's unit was called to treat casualties from a Taliban attack on a village school. Among the wounded was a young Afghan girl who had been severely injured while trying to protect her younger brother from an explosion. As Maria worked to save the girl's life, she thought about Ahmed's daughters and all the children whose futures depended on the courage of adults willing to stand up for what was right. The girl survived and eventually recovered completely from her injuries. Years later, Maria learned that she had grown up to become a teacher like Ahmed's wife Fatima, operating secret schools for girls in areas still controlled by Taliban forces. The cycle of courage and sacrifice that Ahmed had exemplified was continuing through new generations of people willing to risk everything for education, justice, and hope. Maria's story became legendary within military medical circles, though the specific details remained classified for years due to the sensitive nature of the conspiracy Ahmed had exposed. She eventually retired from active duty with the rank of Master Sergeant, having served 6 deployments and saved hundreds of lives under combat conditions. But Maria always insisted that the real hero of her story was Ahmed Hassan, an Afghan interpreter who had chosen courage over profit and truth over safety. His disappearance from the battlefield had marked the beginning of the end for a conspiracy that had betrayed American soldiers and Afghan civilians alike. His final act of passing critical evidence to someone he trusted had ensured that justice would ultimately prevail. At Ahmed's memorial in Arlington National Cemetery, Maria read a letter from his daughters, now both college graduates living in Texas. "Our father taught us that America was not a place, but an idea," the letter said. "An idea that people of all backgrounds can work together to build a better world. Sergeant Rodriguez helped our father prove that this idea is real, and we will spend our lives honoring both their examples." The silence that had fallen over the battlefield after Ahmed's death had not been the end of violence, but rather the beginning of a different kind of battle, a battle for integrity, justice, and the ideals that both American soldiers and Afghan interpreters had been willing to die for. In the end, they had won that battle together, proving that courage and sacrifice could overcome even the most sophisticated forms of betrayal and corruption. Maria returned to El Paso and opened a clinic that provided free medical care to veterans and immigrant families. On the wall of her office hung a photo of Ahmed Hassan with his family, alongside a quote from her grandmother, "True healing happens when we understand that helping one person helps everyone." Every day, Maria tried to live up to the example Ahmed had set, that ordinary people doing their jobs with extraordinary integrity could change the world, one life at a time.